Hello, everybody. Vincent is back, and of course, I'm here to share my story about my exit out of the Watchtower Society and how I became a follower of Christ and found a life of freedom outside of the Watchtower. And of course, I'm very excited to share my story with everyone. Well, what are we going to talk about today, though? Well, I said we were going to talk about, and it's actually happening, I'm going to talk about my personal war against the Watchtower Society. And let's just remember, it's a war against the Watchtower Society. It's not a war against the people within. It's not a war against elders. No, it's a war against the Watchtower Society Corporation. It's just a corporation. It's a business ran by a few men, and that's who we really were at war with. So we're gonna talk about some of the lighter things I did, perhaps some of the funnier things, and then maybe in the next video we're gonna talk about some of the more serious things that I did. But even with the serious things, they're still hilarious. Because I was thinking about the last video I did. I mean, I had a lot of fun making that video because even after I turned off the camera, I was still laughing about just some of the most ridiculous things in the Watchtower Society that we did. And again, it's just a game and nothing really is important. So that really set the mood for what we're going to be talking about. It just lightened up everything. And there was something else that I remembered though after I turned off the camera. Remember how I was joking around about what if a pioneer were to write 90 hours or 60 hours down and didn't really pioneer, he was just lying about the number. Maybe he was doing that for years, and I said he'd probably get disfellowshipped. Well, I kind of found proof that you probably would be disfellowshipped, because as soon as I turned the camera off, I remembered that in the 80s, there actually is a watchtower that it tells you directly that falsifying a field service report, they said they compared it to the sin of Ananias and Sapphira. Can you believe that? I mean, boy, the Watchtower Society really thinks there's something, doesn't it? But it's all just a game. It's just ridiculousness, isn't it? Anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. Well, now we're going to talk about some of the things I did in the Watchtower Society. All right, now if you're a witness watching this video, someone from my old congregation, if they were to watch this video, they'd say, oh, that Vincent, man, he just thinks the world of himself. He is just so self-centered, so self-righteous. They'd be saying stuff like that. But here's what they don't understand. And that is this. And if you're an ex-witness, especially if you're a follower of Christ, you feel the same way. Right now, I have a dream, another dream. And that dream is that if some former elder that I worked with were to wake up, and there is one particular elder I really want to wake up. If an elder came to my door, do you know what words I want to hear? If he was completely awakened from the Watchtower Society, I would love him to come to my door and say, Vincent, you were a jerk. You thought you knew everything. And I would tell him, I did know everything, and I do know everything. And you know something? We would have such a good time making fun of each other, telling each other what kind of a jerk we were in the Watchtower Society and how we tried to hurt each other because, we were like little boys caught in this game and we were losing at the game. And so we had to do what it took to try to win. And we would have the time of our life. We would be laughing, I'd make him the best coffee. And we would just have a great time making fun of each other in the Watchtower Society. So if you want to make me happy and you wake up from the Watchtower Society, just come to my house and tell me what a jerk I was and how self-righteous I was and how I thought I knew everything. Those words coming out of your mouth would be some of the best words I've heard in a long time. So anyway, we're going to get started with this, my war against the Watchtower Society. Let's start with the lighter stuff. I did make a list of things just because, it's easy to forget. But let's talk about some of these things. One thing, we're going to start with some of the lighter stuff. Like a lot of people feel this way. When I was growing up in my congregation or in the circuit, they made a big deal about a black shirt. Of course, there was the tie issue, right? Everybody had to wear a tie. You had to wear a tie when you ran a microphone. You had to tie when you give a talk. You had to wear a tie, 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 tie. The organization is obsessed with this rag that you hang over your neck. All right, well, I always had issues with that. It's like, why are you making a big deal about the tie? Why? Why do you want to control everybody's life in that way? What is the purpose? Then there was the black shirt. I remember I had a part in the circuit assembly. I was like 20 years old, maybe 21. I can't remember. But I was the presiding overseer in my old congregation. We went to another congregation to have a practice session, and I purposely, I did it on purpose. I didn't tell anybody, but I purposely wore a black shirt because I wanted to test the grounds. I wanted to see what we were dealing with here. So we went for this practice session, and sure enough, the circuit overseer got on to me about that, and I disagreed with him, and we had a little argument. But of course, I was young. I kind of, took a step back from him. By the way, this person that did this, he had his nose in the air, clear to heaven. That's the kind of person he was. And he's actually a helper of the governing body today. And if I show you a video of him, you will know who I'm talking about. Well, he was our circuit overseer at the time. So anyway, I went back home. I was with the presiding overseer, and I told him how I felt about this black shirt stuff. Anyway, the presiding overseer, I love that guy. I mean, he's cool. I would love him today as well. But he was like, yeah, I know. We just gotta, just listen to these directions. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. Of course, the black shirt became popular much later on. But why did it become popular? Most of the time, it's because somebody else, they become a friend of the circuit overseer. They perhaps were hosting the circuit overseer, and then they start wearing a black shirt, and everything is cool with that, and then everybody just starts wearing black shirts. But if I wear a black shirt, Vincent wears a black shirt, ooh, it's bad. But, that's how that goes down. But that's just one little thing, even like the way I felt about book bags. I was an elder at the time, and I seen this elder, he wasn't using a book bag. He just had his Bible in hand, had a few tracts in his pocket, and I thought, this is great. I don't have to bring attention with this book bag. It just looked ridiculous, right? You got this huge thing with books and everything in it. Why not just have the Bible and want to share the Bible with people? So I did that. And then sure enough, the circuit overseer comes through, and he says he noticed that there's this trend. And I'm sure he wasn't just talking about me. He's probably talking about other people as well. A trend not to have a book bag. Well, it angered me. And I did finally give in. I bought a small book bag I can just pack under my arm. But that was my feelings after a while. I just got tired of following all of these little directions by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, a business that wanted to run our lives. Well, now you look at those few things that I mentioned, and I know it's just, these are common things that a lot of people had a problem with, but these things happened when I was younger, and it makes up a tapestry. You find out who you are, you start putting all these little things together, and it begins to form a big picture eventually. You find out the true man within you. Remember we mentioned the Truman Show? That's why I call this the Truman Show, because in these videos, this is how I found the true man, or the Truman within myself. So all of these little things make for a tapestry. So these are the things I looked at. And then as you get older, then you begin to see some of the bigger things that you've done, bigger things that you see, and the Truman really begins to shine. And here's a couple of things. Like, see, Vincent, he was a regular pioneer. I mean, he regular pioneered like 2 years after high school. He regular pioneered as a senior. I was a regular auxiliary pioneer as a junior, and maybe even as a sophomore, if I remember right. I mean, believe me, I was the living, breathing Watchtower. That Vincent was an absolute idiot. Well, he's still an idiot today, but yeah, it's new and improved idiot, okay? So how did I feel about pioneering? You would think, well, he loves pioneering, right? I mean, he pioneered all these years. What does he really think about the concept of pioneering? Well, a few years before I actually left, and this guy, he used to tell me this all the time. He was a ministerial servant. He was an older man. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to hide how I feel. I felt really good that people could just come to me and say whatever they wanted. They could say whatever they wanted to me, and I would never put them down for it. I would never turn them into elders, and they knew that. So they would just share all of their feelings with me. So one day I went out and I walked outside of the Kingdom Hall, and he was right there at the front door. And I was service overseer, and I just said, hey, you want to pioneer? Because I was pioneering that month. And he looked at me, and this is just something he said for a long time. He said, no, why should I have them announce my name from that stage? Well, do I have to tell everybody what I'm doing? Yeah, that's not right. He just really had a problem with the idea that, telling everybody what he's doing, almost like he's being self-righteous and all that. And he said, I don't believe in all that. Shh. S-H-I, that word. And he said that word many times in his conversation. And he's been doing this for a while with me. And, I was just laughing, as he was telling me this. I'm like, I even told him, I said, yeah, I know. I said, I feel the same way. I said, I know. I feel exactly the way you do. It's just that, I pioneer because it's just a way of telling people that, I'm not a hypocrite. I'm a service overseer and I go out in service and I want to support people. That's the only reason why I pioneered. And he just went off about pioneering again and how it was just a bunch of what. And again, we just laughed and we had a good time out there. But I was so happy. I was so happy to hear how people could just come to me and talk to me about these things. But on the serious note, when I was reflecting back, that was the Truman in me. That is how I really felt about pioneering. What I did in my life as far as actually pioneering, that is not who I was. What did I think about the whole concept of pioneering? Right there. I agreed with him 100%. So right there, I found the Truman in me as I reflected back. Well, what are some other things that I've done in the Watchtower Society? Or not so much that I did, but how did I feel about things? Well, there is one thing I did do. And actually, I have fun sharing this little story. And I just want to let you know that whatever I'm telling you right now, for the most part, this is the first time, actually, that anyone even knows about what I did. Like what I'm going to talk about next, you're the first ones to know. No one else knows. Not even my friends, no one in my family. So you're very privileged to find out some of the stuff that I actually did. As an elder, again, you see me laughing, it's because I just can't take any of this serious anymore. These are good times. When I look back, this was funny times. People would always come to me as an elder and they would say, wow, Brother Gomez, you give some of the best talks. We just love your talks. Well, they probably did. And I'm going to tell you why. I don't know how the elders did not pick up on this, probably because I used a lot of discretion, a lot of discernment how I went about approaching this. But when I gave public talks, I usually deleted about 1/3 of that talk. Yes, I did that. And the way I got around it to ease my conscience back then was I would pull like one line. Like there might be a 10 or 15 minute section from the talk. I would literally delete that whole section, pull out one line, and I'm going to give an example of that. And that would ease my conscience. I would take that one line and expand on it and just blow it up. And I'd spend like 10 or 15 minutes on that part and not cover the stuff in the outline. And a good example of that, and this was one of my favorite outlines, it was called, Does God Count You Personally Important? And I loved giving that talk because isn't that what people in the Kingdom Hall needed? We always talked about us as an organization and, but rarely did we talk about us as individuals, how God loves us and he knows everything that we do. And he's really attentive to everything that we do and how we feel about him and all of that. So I had this talk. The first part of the talk, it started out very good. I actually enjoyed the little outline. It has like a 5-minute introduction or something like that. And then the next section was all right, and half of that section was pretty good. But then as the outline proceeded, I wish I had my outlines with me. I'd actually like to show you these things. As the outline proceeded, it became less and less personal. It starts off like saying, oh, God can number the hairs on your head and all of this. But then as you continue on, it becomes more like, yeah, God loves mankind, and that's why he made man to reproduce so he doesn't become extinct, and it becomes more general. Well, then on page 2 of the outline, it had like a 10 or 15 minute section, and then it didn't make sense. He started talking about the anointed, the 144,000, and his organization. Honestly, I don't care how many times I read that outline, I couldn't figure out how do you tie that in with the theme. And what's funny, I went to, there was an elder school one time, and they said, when we're preparing a public talk, we need to get into the mind of the one who wrote that talk. Figure out what he was trying to say. Well, with that talk, consciously, I'm like, has this guy been smoking too much Watchtower dope? Because what's going on here? This thing is ridiculousness. I mean, you start off making people feel good, and then by the end of the talk, you being important to God on a personal level, I mean, it's totally lost in this mess. And this wasn't the only talk like this. This is just a good example because this was one of my favorite talks. So I would just completely delete that entire section. I'd pull one line out. Maybe it says Jehovah cares for you, and I would take that one line and just expand on it in ways, and I would go way beyond the outline in all my talks. I would take one line, and then I would go beyond that with my own understanding of the scriptures. I'm not talking doctrine, but there was a lot of scriptures in the Bible that really touched my heart, that I appreciated, and I would share these thoughts through these talks. And that's why people enjoyed them. It wasn't anything special I did other than deleting most of the talk from the outline. And I did that for years, many years. I chose from those outlines like you do when you go to an all-you-can-eat restaurant. And I chose what I wanted, and I threw the rest away. So I did that for years because I did not like a lot of those outlines. I just didn't agree with so much of how they presented this information. My goal, and see, this is why I reflected back on this. Like, why did I do that? It's because I cared about that congregation. I wanted that congregation to feel good. When you hear a talk, does God count you personally important? You need to be able to leave that Kingdom Hall and know that God loves you as a person, not as a group, but he loves you no matter what. So I had to reflect back that. See, that is the Truman. See, that was the Truman in me. I wasn't, how we talked about how, everyone was playing a role in the Watchtower. Yes, I was playing the role of an elder, but the Truman was in there. And so that is just one other thing I reflected on to find out how I really felt about things. Well, there's a lot of other little things that the way I felt. I mean, like, for example, yearbooks. I used to love the yearbooks. But you know what would anger me? Like, on a very conscious level, and I became angry with the Watchtower Society mentally. It was like, I got so sick and tired of the Watchtower Society talking about buildings and buildings being dedicated. And, you'd have these entire sections of the yearbook just about, buildings, and statistics. And I consciously thought, these guys are full of garbage because I'm a construction worker. I'm a drywall finisher. I go to work 8 hours a day. I come home. The last thing I want to do is pull out a book from the Watchtower Society and read about buildings and how special they are. I got so sick of that. I mean, I used to get angry, like, consciously at the Watchtower Society for doing this nonsense. It's like, aren't we a spiritual organization? Let's talk about spiritual things for once. I got so sick and tired of it. In fact, it got to the point where I absolutely hated, and I told some ministerial servants about this. See, remember I talked about these Jedi, they all meet together and talk about things. I just went out and told them. I said, I absolutely hate Kingdom Hall building projects. And what really began to really cause me to hate Kingdom Hall building projects more than ever anything else is one time I had an employer who was a witness. He would drag us off from a job where we were getting paid. And we would leave early, and you wouldn't even have knowledge of this. And we would just drive up to a Kingdom Hall, and we would have to start working on that Kingdom Hall. And I used to get so angry at that, and it just made me begin to hate all building projects. Well, what's ironic about that is I knew someone who came to me, and I was telling him how much I hated Kingdom Hall building projects, and he says, I like Kingdom Hall building projects. And I'm like, really? Well, it's so funny. Why did he like Kingdom Hall building projects? Because he didn't want to be in the Kingdom Hall meetings. He would rather be working out building something than being at a meeting and having to listen to some talk. So anyway, I just had to throw that out. But again, there was the Truman in me. I hated all of this, just filler is what I called it. It was just garbage. I mean, I wanted to hear spiritual things. And I may even talk about this a little bit later, but I was starving spiritually in the Watchtower Society, and we're going to talk about how that was manifested. How did I feel about that, and I do want to have a video about that. But yes, I was starving spiritually, and the last thing I needed to read about are buildings and statistics and things like that. Something else that really bothered me in the Watchtower Society, uh, and this is just a side note. I don't know what it is. Is it just me? Maybe in your comments, let me know about this. I noticed that witnesses get obsessed with notebooks and little pens and, you know, little pads of paper. I mean, they'll order special, service record books. I mean, I even had a personalized service record book I ordered from some company called Stoops. I call it Stupids now, but yeah, witnesses were obsessed with those things, and they loved all of their colored markers, coloring their little watchtower with, making sure everybody knows what they're going to comment and how smart they were and how they studied their watchtower. And that has always irritated me. That has always bothered me. And I would hear elders get on the stage and they would say, yeah, I noticed a lot of naked watchtowers. You know what? That made me so angry. I stopped highlighting my watchtowers. I completely. I did not, I no longer, I would read the Watchtower, I'd look at the scriptures, and not that it really mattered if you looked at the scriptures, but anyway, I would study these magazines, but I would not highlight anything because it all was just a show, and I got tired of that. I mean, I didn't care if somebody said, hey, Brother Gomez doesn't study his Watchtower. I didn't care. That didn't bother me because you don't need to highlight things to study. I mean, I read the Bible all the time. I didn't highlight in my Bible. Highlighting answers has nothing to do with study. So anyway, that showy display just really bothered me all these years. I just couldn't handle it anymore. So I stopped doing that intentionally. And there were people that noticed that, and they would say things about it. And I would just tell them that is not a requirement for Bible study. So now I'm looking at my list of other things that I did in the Watchtower. Just simple things like, remember I talked to you about how I disagreed with various teachings in the Watchtower Society. I didn't agree with the 144,000 and many other little things. I mentioned how some of these illustrations, like in the book of Matthew about the 10 virgins, I did not agree with how the Watchtower Society applied that, because when I read that back then, I looked at it like Jesus was talking about right before he comes. He wasn't talking about 1914, 1919, none of that nonsense. He was talking about at his coming. And that's when that application begins of the 10 virgins. Well, there was this older man. He was a ministerial servant at the time. I think he was once an elder a long time ago, but him and I, we would talk about this. Well, I did anyway. I would just say, hey, there's this account, and I almost want to. I would tell him that I just want to write a letter to the Watchtower Society and give them this idea that I had. I wanted to run it through them. How I viewed the scripture. Of course, that could never have happened, but it was just something I would say to him. Well, anyway, he would listen to me and he'd want to hear more, right? So I would do, this happened over a long period of time. We're talking months here. I was always telling him how I felt about different things. Well, I became known as the Vin Tower, and that's what he would say. He would come into the Kingdom Hall and he would say, oh, it's the Vin Tower. And I'm like, shh. And he would smile and say, oh, the Vin Tower is here. And he would say it kind of loud. And I'm like, come on, guy, can you lower the volume here? And then he would laugh. And of course, he was just doing it to be funny. But so yeah, I look back at that. I look back at how I felt about the Watchtower, how I felt about all these little things. And I began to see the Truman. That was the Truman. I wanted to know the truth about the Bible. I didn't like how the Watchtower was interpreting things. I didn't like the attitude, like say about these naked watchtowers. What's funny about the Watchtower Society is you have Watchtower, policies and doctrines. You'll read about them in the Watchtower or in letters from the governing body. But there's some things in the Watchtower Society that has just become part of the culture, and it's become universal, like a naked watchtower. I never read about that in the Watchtower, but in all the congregations you go to, that's kind of a common expression. That's the way people feel. Same is true, like use the word back room. I mean, you don't see that word in a watchtower, but everyone knows what the back room is, at least in the United States. I mean, we even laugh about going in the back room because we know that that's where people go to be browbeaten by, by elders. So a lot of these things are just, they were evolved in this organization as a culture. And so, yeah, I was kind of fighting all of that. And there's just many other things that I just I just couldn't handle anymore. Well, this was a funny thing. I think at this point in time, I was getting very frustrated with how I was going against my character. I mean, I'm Truman, and I'm having to act in this role. I was given the assignment at a district convention, and that assignment was to make sure that everyone stayed like 5 feet away from the baptism pool. Well, 5 feet away from the metal fence or gate that was already like 10 or 15 feet away from that. Well, there was a man that came up, him and his wife, and this man, he was in my congregation, but you didn't see him all the time. I mean, he would come once in a while, and he had a beard, and he never looked happy in that Kingdom Hall. And of course, I mean, if you have a beard, I mean, you've sinned against the Holy Spirit, of course. But anyway, he obviously did not agree with that, and he purposely had a beard, and I totally get it, of course. But he was hanging around these rails, and I was told to keep people away. So I went up to him and I said, hey, I hate to tell you this, but we got to be at least so many feet away from this gate and all of that. And he looked at me like, who do you think I am? Do you think I'm a kid? He says, and then he made some comment about how ridiculous it was or whatever. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, that's just what they tell me, And then he made some other comment. And finally, I just couldn't take it anymore. I said, hey, look, I'm just going to be honest with you. I said, this is the stupidest, most ridiculous job I have ever been given. And I am so sorry. I said, I don't care. You can go right ahead and hang out here. I said, I really don't care. I said, it is absolute ridiculousness, and I totally understand you. I said, so anyway, yeah, do what you want. And I just pretty much vanished from that job after that. I just walked away because I just couldn't take it anymore. I mean, the ridiculousness. The Watchtower Society, they remind me of the Jews. I mean, you had the law, right, which was good. It was God's law. And that's what the Watchtower does. They say, oh, we follow the Bible, the law. But then you have, in the Jews, you had the Talmud, which was not God's law, which was a bad book. And that's the way the Watchtower is. That's what Watchtower law is. It's like the Talmud. And then within each congregation, you also have this oral law that goes around. And as people become Jehovah's Witnesses, these things are absorbed in them. So you can see that, I just disagreed with so many things. And these are just the little things that I disagreed with, things that were building up in me over time. So all of these things, when I went back and I reflected upon them, I could really see the Truman within me. I was coming to find out who I really was. Did I really love pioneering? Did I really loyally support that organization as I thought I was doing? No. You can see that was not true at all. Even though I believed it was God's organization, I believed that the Watchtower Society screwed up on a lot of things, and I did not agree with the way they were doing things. So anyway, that made me feel good to reflect on these things. I began to see who I really was in the Watchtower Society. And of course, it was so important that I did that because, as I said, I left God, and then I started reflecting upon these things, and I began to wake up. I began to wake up to who I was, and then I knew what I had to do after that. Well, we're going to end the video there. We had some fun with that, but next time we're going to actually have some more fun. We're going to get into some serious stuff, a few things anyway that were serious, but still they were funny, and we're going to have a good time with it. Well, until the next time, we'll see you later. Like, subscribe, share these links with everyone, and I greatly appreciate it. We'll see you next time.